So, right on forward to part two. And we're going to talk about two different narratives that are used when discussing technological protection measures. So there's the two constituency narrative that you most often hear. It's a balance between the needs of creators and users. In other words, just like copyright law that includes that balance, you have a discussion of technical measures that mirrors that balance. And the idea is that you have a measure that's applied to a copyrighted work by copyright holders, which will in theory stop infringement or enforce licensing terms set by the copyright holders. And there's various problems with this which are discussed. So these restrictions do not respect the contours of copyright. So for the vast majority of activities, copyright does not regulate at all. Then copyright is a series of activities, which if you do those specific activities with respect to a copyrighted work, you need permission. And then there's the concept of fair use and fair dealings, which is a further layer, which says that yes, this is an activity that would normally be regulated by copyright, but the very specific thing that you're doing, the very specific way that you're using the work or dealing with the work is going to be considered fair. So, and by fair, meaning does not require permission, does not require payment. So there's those different layers, and it's actually quite complicated to figure out whether or not a specific activity is or is not infringing or does not require permission or payment. And these technical measures do not respect that complexity or those contours and will disallow you to do things which are not regulated by copyright at all, or that would have been fair if it was if it was copyright itself that it was tied to. It inflates a contractual dispute to having statutory damages. So these contracts that are the license agreements, when a copyright case happens, one of the first things a judge is going to be doing is he's going to be sitting there saying, okay, so here are some clauses which are purely permissions that, in order to do those activities that you require permission, here are the conditions related to those. And then there's going to be terms that are going to go beyond that, which if you violate those, it is just a contract that you violated and not copyright. And that type of nuance, again, becomes not possible if the technological protection measure needs to be broken in order to even get to that type of conversation. So you're inflating a contract dispute into having statutory damages. Copyright law has statutory damages, contract law does not. Access controls. Again, specifically, we talked about use controls and access controls. Use controls are controls of those uses which copyright law restricts. Access controls, access is not part of copyright. So things that control access are definitely outside of copyright. But if you think of it, those activities that copyright regulates are all activities that you needed to have access to the work in the first place in order to do. If you can control access, and then you set a series of permissions before you can have access, you can essentially rewrite the entire contours of copyright law in the contract that allows you to get access in the first place. So access controls are not a protection of copyright. Access controls are a replacement of copyright. So if copyright is your concern, then you should be wanting to make sure that Canada rejects the idea of access controls. And again, if you want to discuss this more common narrative, the two constituency narrative, Michael Geist did a 30 days of DRM where each day he essentially highlighted one of the various issues that digital rights management, technological protection measures, whatever language you wish to use, what type of problems these things have. And 30 is actually a rather small number, but 30 is the number that he decided. There's a lot more than 30 problems that come up as soon as you allow technological protection measures. But the narrative is generally that these technological protection measures unbalance copyright law by giving too much power to creators, copyright holders, versus users. We discussed a little bit about the elevation of a contract dispute into copyright. contract law is provincial jurisdiction. So if what these technical measures are protecting is contract law, then does the federal government have jurisdiction to essentially pass that legislation? And that is something that Jeremy DeBeer asked in a paper he did, Constitutional Jurisdiction over Para-Copyright Laws. And he said a thorough study of the proposed provisions shows them to be a para-copyright law, the true character of which is quite different from traditional copyright legislation. And two other professors essentially said, in the context of Bill C-61, Bill C-61 having the same, pretty much the same technical protection measures aspects, that said the DRM provisions of Bill C-61 represent a poorly veiled attempt by the government to strengthen the contractual rights available to copyright owners. So there's that distinction between contractual rights and copyright. Here's my problem. Content can't make decisions. A paperback book, like digital content can't make decisions any more than a paperback book is capable of reading itself out loud. Or the monster book of monsters from Harry Potter is able to come alive and chase Harry Potter and hide under the bed and all that type of thing. Content is passive. If there are any decisions to be made, those decisions are encoded in software and they run on some hardware. So there isn't really just two constituencies to be worried about. There's four. And so I do this type of presentation often. I say I'm holding up four things in my hand. In this hand, it happens to be a DVD, and yes, it does happen to be Harry Potter. And it represents the copyright holder, and it represents, in this case, I physically own the CD. That doesn't mean I can do everything with it. The things that copyright regulates are still regulated. But I do own something physical, tangible. I am allowed to resell this and do various things. It could also be seen as the two constituencies in the regular copyright debate, which is the copyright holder and the audience. That's two. This represents the other two. This just happens to be a smartphone. It could be any type of computer or any type of hardware that has some software running on it and the hardware itself. Now, I'm the owner of this hardware. And so we could look at this as, four different owners whose rights need to be respected. So, medium and content. Content is passive, and it cannot make decisions on its own. Again, you do not live in the Harry Potter world. This is not Hogwarts. Books do not come alive and chase you down the street and that type of thing. Content cannot self-destruct. The number of times I heard the word self-destruct in committee was actually quite embarrassing, but that's one of the problems with this legislation is the people pushing it forward do not understand the technology enough, and sometimes it really sounds like they're talking about a Harry Potter book, not talking about real science and actual things that we're going to see in our real lives. Content can be manipulated in various ways to accomplish various goals. So for instance, with cryptography, and I can do a little bit of a cryptography 101 later if people are interested, but you can take the content and scramble it such that you need a decryption key. So think of locks and keys, which is why they often talk about digital locks in this context. But so you're scrambling it in a way that you require a key to unlock it and access it. There's watermarking and various things like that where you can put an encoding in it, and it could be a visible encoding or an invisible encoding, but it essentially sets some information about the origins of it. And for instance, you could put a watermark into each individual item that you send out, each individual copy or that you communicate or distribute, such that if someone did unlawfully distribute it further, you'd know exactly which customer had unlawfully shared it. So there's essentially mathematics that can be used by copyright holders to do various things, but there isn't a magic that can be put onto the content to allow it to make decisions. And for instance, one of those decisions, or one of those things that involves some sort of a logic and an action or a lack of an action, would be to decide whether or not something could or couldn't be copied. So there is no such thing as a copy control that can be put onto content. You can instruct a computer not to copy things, but again, that's software running on hardware. So let's discuss that. Hardware simply follows the instructions in the form of software. So software is just a series of instructions. Think of it as a recipe. You follow the instructions, you make something. You could think of it as policy. Public policy, those are rules that humans should obey. Software is rules that computer obeys. A lot of what people know from political science applies quite directly to computer science. It would be very useful for people to understand that analogy and not be thinking that software is some sort of magical thing or computers are some sort of a magical thing. So computer security. It's all about ensuring that only authorized software runs, and then only authorized persons are able to run software. Now you'll notice the word authorized, and we'll discuss a little bit later about who gets to decide what is and is not authorized. You have authentication, data stored on disks can be encrypted, such that you require keys to unlock them, all that type of thing. So the whole question is controlling hardware. So you hear the phrase copy control a lot, but there's no really such thing as a copy control. What you have is a computer control, and the question is, who is controlling that computer? So there's two methods, two broad methods that we can discuss. One is some stuff that's very clearly malware, so software installed on the computer without the permission or often even the knowledge of the owner of the computer. It affects the computer. It allows that the entity that created the malware to control the computer against the interests of its owner. One of the most famous cases was the Sony rootkit. So Sony included on some music CDs essentially something that, a virus, which when you put the music CD into your computer, and in this case it happened to be narrowly Microsoft Windows-based computers, it would install a rootkit, some software that hid itself into the deep under part of your computer. That hid itself such that you didn't even know that it was there, and it did various things to your computer to, in theory, control what you could do with the content. It did various privacy invasion things. It also opened major security holes such that third parties beyond Sony were able to gain access to people's computers. It was a massive security problem. All in theory to protect copyright. And of course, all you needed to do to circumvent this technical measure was to hold down the shift key when you booted your computer, which meant that the auto-executable stuff on Windows didn't run. Or even scarier than that, you didn't run Windows. So if you took this CD and you installed it and put it in your Linux computer, you put it in your Macintosh, put it in your whatever you were running that was not Microsoft Windows, and it wouldn't do anything at all. So this was a technical measure that was trivial to circumvent. Anybody who actually wanted to circumvent it would know how to do that. All it accomplished was to cause massive damage to various people's computers. It was a massive wealth destroyer. So if you want to talk about wealth destruction, which is language that some copyright holders like to use, especially from the music industry, people like say from Sony would like to use the word wealth destroyers. Well, they were a wealth destroyer, and as far as I'm concerned, they did more damage than the infringement that they were supposedly trying to stop, which of course this technical measure had no impact on whatsoever. So there's malware, and there's been various attempts to do that over the years. The other way to control the hardware, to have someone other than the owner of the computer control the hardware, is for some previous owner of the hardware to retain the keys to locks that are placed on that hardware. So with common technological protection measures we see today, an example is you have what goes on with DVDs. There's two locks, not one. There is an anti-interoperability lock on the content such that the content, it's encrypted, and that the decryption keys are only put onto authorized devices. Those authorized devices are then locked down such that their owners are not able to control the software on those devices. You'll see that with DVD players. You'll see that with a lot of the Apple iOS devices where Apple retains the keys. In theory, they're selling it to people, but they're retaining the keys. Whether that's really legitimately to be called a sale is another story. But both of these activities infringe the rights of the owners of the technology. And then the third part, I think we should discuss about different types of infringement and who is doing it.